Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Yellow Tape. This is your co host, Nidhi, and we have Julian. Today's episode, we are going to actually shift our gears from normal forensic work to digital forensics. The reason why we're choosing the episode is because we have so much advancement that's going on in the field of science and technology. So, technology, the digital part of it. So that's why we're dedicating this episode to digital forensics. And I will let Julian introduce our guest.
Hey guys. So today we have Jerome GRECO, and he's actually a digital forensics attorney. Cool, I know. And he works for the Legal Aid Society down in New York. So we should have went to go see him in person, but everything don't work out that way. So he's actually certified as a wireless analyst and certified in cellular historical data reconstruction. So we get into the whole phone wiretap, cell towers, the AI. We get into the whole talk. So we'll stop holding you guys up and get straight into the episode. But before you do that, just guys, remember to like, share, and subscribe. And let's get into the episode.
So would you mind just describing to us what digital forensic means in most layman terms possible so that the audience can learn what it's about?
Sure. So digital forensics is a field that focuses on obtaining and preserving and then later potentially presenting digital data, right? And that could be from a cell phone, from a computer hard drive, and now increasingly more commonly servers and cloud storage. And so it's about setting rules and techniques to how to obtain that data and to do so in a way that preserves it in the most sound way, right? That it doesn't changes aren't occurring to it that may affect its validity, right, or its use.
So when you say preserve, what do you mean by preserve?
So ideally, right, you want a exact copy of the data, right? So if you were to wanted something from a phone, right, a cell phone, you want to be able to make an exact copy of the files so that there's no changes whatsoever as best as possible. It doesn't. There are some times it doesn't always work as well as we would all like, but that's the ultimate goal. And then the purpose of that is so that you can then work off the copy, right? And you can work off that copy and to do analysis and to find what you're looking for, or to not find what you're looking for, as sometimes happens, right? And then the benefit of having it done in that way, similar to other forensic practices, is that then it can be presented as evidence, right, in a court. Either, my practice is more criminal defense, and so in criminal cases, but also it does come up in civil and administrative proceedings and things like that as well.
So you work with the Legal Aid Society. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the organization, what they do, and how digital forensic is used in the landscape of legal terms and how it is presented in the court?
Absolutely. So the Legal Aid Society is we're a very large law firm that helps indigent people, right? And we have three main practices. We have the criminal practice, which is our largest, and which is where the majority of my work comes into play, and that's the criminal defense practice, and that's more commonly known to people as public defenders, right? And so we are the main public defender for New York City. There are other offices, but we are the one the largest, and we cover the entire city. We also have a juvenile practice, which juvenile rights practice, which kind of has two parts. There's what they call delinquency, which are essentially children charged with crimes, but not adults yet. So their courts are a little different. And then also representing the interests of the of children directly when, for example, if their parents are, ACS is saying that they were negligent, we represent the actual interests of the children themselves, the child themselves, because frankly, no one else does. And that also may include going against what ACS or another department wants. And then our civil practice has way too many has way too many components to it for me to name them all. But some of our biggest ones are landlord tenant, dealing with people being evicted, or public housing not providing proper services. Also immigration. Those are probably our two biggest, but there's employment law and a whole bunch of others, and a lot of little units, and it's hard for me to remember all of them myself. So it's pretty incredible. The digital forensic units is, the majority of our work comes into the criminal defense practice, but we do work with the juvenile rights practice and the civil practices as well. And we have our unit has a broader interpretation of digital forensics than is traditional, right? And so we include electronic surveillance under that umbrella. So things like facial recognition, ShotSpotter, which is a gunshot detection location system. Those we consider to be under our umbrella, but most digital forensic practitioners would not consider that to be pure digital forensics. And so my unit, I'm the supervisor of the unit, and we have under me, we have 4 staff attorneys, 5 in-house analysts, and 1 paralegal, and we have 2 digital forensics labs with a lot of the same equipment that law enforcement has. And the benefit to us is kind of multifold. One is being able to challenge law enforcement's interpretation or the work they've done, but also be able to provide access to those tools for the benefit of our clients, right? And so, being able to, with their consent, get a copy of data from their phone, to maybe prove an alibi, like location information, or to prove that there was a text message sent and things like that. And the benefit to them could be tremendous, and not having to provide their entire device to essentially their adversaries.
Right.
That's amazing. That's a big department. That's a lot of work. First of all, this is
Yeah.
what society does, and then what encompasses in digital forensics. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
That's a lot. We always think about DNA and fingerprint evidence and like just forgotten as to how much falls under other umbrellas as well. Like we just skipped that part, that it just works fine.
Yeah. With that, I do have to give a shout out to we do have a DNA unit.
Oh, true.
Yeah, who does some of the more traditional physical forensics, right? Like DNA, fingerprints, and challenging ballistics and stuff like that. But yeah, and so we do have some overlaps, particularly where they're challenging like electronic raw data and the algorithm that, say, like a mixture DNA software uses, like the star mix, true allele, some of those. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, a lot of work.
A lot.
That's interesting stuff, though. So that's really cool.
Thank you.
Earlier, when you were talking about the, I guess, initial digital forensics question maybe asked you, I was wondering, like, what is the I guess the main source when you talk about collecting and preserving evidence? Like, is it mainly like phone evidence and emails and stuff like that? Like, what is the I guess main source of the evidence that you guys come across?
I would say at this point it is mostly phones. Cell phones are the major source of evidence. When I first started in the unit, it was just shifting over from more like traditional like computer laptops and desktops to mobile phones. Now, cell phones are, I think, by far the largest, but it is now shifting. We're seeing another shift to the cloud, right? And so cloud backups like iCloud, Google Drive, also stuff that maybe never existed directly on your phone, like social media, right? Getting that from the cloud, and then of course Dropbox and things like that. I will say it's kind of funny. We don't see a ton of email. We do see it sometimes, and it could be relevant, but the vast majority of people really don't communicate via email anymore. It's except mostly for work purposes, right?
Right.
And generally, that's not where we're seeing the majority of the issues come up. Is usually not via email, but text messages, and then less so you have SMS, which is standard text message, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now you have all these different apps like WhatsApp, Signal, that are data-based, right? And so won't even come up on the phone company's phone records because they're not actually using the same system, right? They're using data and not the actual text message plan. And so I would say people are, and of course, social media, Facebook Messenger, Instagram, Twitter DMs, whatever. Yeah, a lot less email than I think people may think.
Right. Which makes sense.
Yeah.
No, please. Are people getting more aware that there is a way to like track the IP address and things like that through like, I don't know, TV shows that you can be tracked if you send an email?
I think people are more aware that how easy it is for law enforcement in particular to track someone. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how it works and a lot of myths, both good and bad, in terms of like how people think they could be protecting themselves. But I unfortunately think a large percentage of people are aware these things are happening and don't have the time, energy, or skill necessarily to do anything about it. And I think a lot of them have just feel defeated in a way about it, which I find sad but understandable. It's unfortunately the way things work right now. It takes a lot of effort to try to maintain your privacy, and that's not the way it should be, because I do believe privacy is a human right. And so really it should be difficult to chip away at it versus difficult to maintain it. But I think that's currently what's happening. And so I think a lot of, you hear a lot of people say privacy is dead. And I don't agree with that, because I think the moment you accept that is the moment it's true.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people, they have just accepted that this is the way things are, and don't really have any other options. I mean, you even see that, and there's some people who don't actually think it's a problem, right? Like, I mean, we all have the people, our friends or family, who overshare on social media, and you're like, why did you post that? Right? And they're like, what? It's no big deal. Everybody should know about this thing. You're like, no, they shouldn't. Right? And that's true, right? Like, we have this. But I think even for a lot of those people, they'd be really surprised just how much information you could find on someone.
That's yeah. I'm just like, for sure. So consider like privacy, and to my understanding, like Legal Aid Society also works with a lot of like policies around different departments. So do you guys see as to privacy being a big issue when you're presenting data to the court? Like legally, as to what kind of main backslash do you get from the community, or when you're presenting the evidence like in the court?
So yeah, I mean, privacy is extremely important to us. I'm lucky enough that I get to work at a place that my personal beliefs and moral beliefs pretty much coincide with the organizations, which I know most people do not have that benefit. So I understand how lucky I am. And so I get to my personal view on privacy fit with how we address clients and their data. And so, to start with, we are only able to do it on their consent, right? We're only able to extract something from their phone or from their computer or an account with their consent. And so if a client says, no, I'm not going to give that to you, we may try to convince them about the importance of it. But in the end, there's nothing I could do to force that person, and I wouldn't, right? Unlike law enforcement, who could physically remove it from them and get a search warrant, right? Regardless of what they say. We also take extreme measures to try to protect their data as best as possible. I mean, nothing is unhackable. Nothing is 100%, and I'm definitely not challenging anybody to do anything. But we take serious measures to protect our clients' data, just as we do with with their medical records that we get in cases and things like that. And so in the courtroom, we're, one of the benefits you have as a defense attorney, prosecutors are required, or in theory are required to turn over everything in the case. It doesn't always work that way, and there's definitely a lot of fighting about what they're required to turn over. But the defense, we have privilege, we have attorney-client privilege, right, and attorney work product, and we're really only required to turn over what we intend to introduce in a hearing or trial. And as a result, the pictures on my client's phone that maybe are embarrassing to them or to their partner, if they're not relevant to the case, there's no reason for me to introduce that, right? We're only sticking with what actually is relevant to them and is going to help them. On the flip side, though, law enforcement doesn't have that same interest, right? And we definitely see law enforcement go way beyond anything that they need to, and I think that's a problem we're putting a lot of effort in pushing back on, that these we call overbroad search warrants, right? That to say, oh, we need to search the entire device and every piece of data on it. It's like, why? Right? For you have, arguably a probable cause to maybe look at their phone call list, or even like say the photos from one day, but you're looking at their photos from 2 years, right? Like, and it's just, and so it's very invasive. And the thing I always say to people to kind of give like an idea of this is, right, like the search, like, we always think about your home, right? The search of your home, like this, your domain, and that's such an invasion of your privacy, right? That it needs to be importantly protected. Man, I'd let them search my home, every home I've ever lived in 10 times over, rather than be able to search my phone, right? Yes. Think about all the things that are on your phone that probably aren't in your house, right? Like, unless you're one of the few people who are writing detailed love letters to your partner, those text messages, we all know, right? And pictures, right, that are taken, and there's definitely pictures on your phone that you're not framing on, putting on the wall in your house, right? And like, and medical records, banking records, right? All that stuff is connected to most people's devices.
Yeah. Right. And one piece of equipment has a lot of information.
Right. Yeah. And it's really invasive, right? And so I think one of the problems with the law is that it's designed to move slowly, intentionally, but tech doesn't move at the pace of the law. And so the tech is way further than the law has been able to consider what to do with these issues. And the law is always playing catch up. And as a result, until it does catch up to something, a lot of people's privacy, among other things, get hurt or get invaded. And unfortunately, by the time it does catch up to something, we're already 10 steps onto something else.
Yeah.
So part of the reason why our unit exists is to try to fix that, right? And to help that from the defense side, because I'll tell you, law enforcement has a lot of money for it, and they are not shy in using it.
Well, we kind of know that, but no one talks about it. There. I don't know.
Crazy. Yeah. So I do have a question. Sure. I see that you're certified in cellular historical data reconstruction. How do you go about getting that certification? One, and I guess the name says kind of what it is, but how often do you use it? And I guess how do you use it, I suppose?
It's a really good question. And so took class to do it, and there was a test, and and so for anybody watching maybe doesn't get fully what that is, mainly it's taking what we call historical cell site location information, right? This maybe more commonly or colloquially referred to as cell tower data, right? Yeah. Which phone tower your phone is connecting to, typically when it makes or receives a call or a text, right? And it gets a little more complicated than that, but for our purposes, now. And it's actually a major problem, because unlike in a lot of fields where there's like a set standard, there really isn't for this. right? And they're different companies that offer different classes, and not everybody agrees on everything. Short of a radio frequency engineer who does the actual setting up the towers and maintains them, it's not clear how much anyone else below that, or separate from that, actually counts as an expert in court. And there's actually a lot of disagreement right now in the court system about that, and conflicting cases, including in New York, where I practice. And so it is actually a problem in digital forensics in general, that there aren't as easy set standards, right? Like, if you're a doctor, you've been approved by a particular standard medical board, right? And that's how you became a doctor. There isn't like competing medical boards all across the country, and you can get admitted into one and not the other, right? Presumably, to some extent. I know there is some controversy there, but we'll leave that for today. And same thing, being a lawyer. Like, I can't be a lawyer in New York unless I'm admitted in, right? Like, and so there's an actual set standard, whether it's right or wrong, it exists. Digital forensics is a little less clear on that. And a lot of times the companies who create the tools are the ones providing the certifications. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just that it's sometimes hard to determine what actually qualifies somebody as an expert. And so for myself, I'm not usually, one testifying. I'm an attorney, right? And the reason why I kind of learned those things is so that I could do my job better and help other people do it, right? Because now when I hear somebody testify about something like that, since I understand it well enough, I could call them out when it requires, or even my own people, properly direct them to make sure that they're getting out the information correctly. But it's a real concern, particularly in this field with cell towers. There's a lot of people going around calling themselves experts that may not actually be experts, and there's a lot of people making claims with certainty that don't actually have certainty, right? So just give you an idea, right? A generally accepted fact is that your phone connects to the tower that has the strongest signal. Typically, that's the one you're closest to, but not always, right? So I could be, let's say a quarter mile away from a tower, and I may connect to a tower that's a half a mile away, because between me and the tower that's a quarter mile away, there's a large skyscraper building that is making the signal not as strong, right? And so when somebody says, they were definitely within this range of the tower, right? And the tower has this range on this date and this time, that's mostly subjective and not something you could definitively say. Now you could say, like, these towers have a maximum range of this, right? And to tell you, a lot of them have a maximum range pretty far, right? So if you have a maximum range of a mile across New York City is a large area, right? That doesn't really help you. Doesn't help you know if the person was at the crime scene or not, right? Now again, it can get more complicated, but I find the people who are giving these definitive statements about whether or not somebody's phone was in a particular or giving this very small area where it is are often full of it.
Was this kind of reconstruction, if I can say it, reconstruction used in one of the cases? Was it Abu Sayyad's case where?
So I didn't follow it as closely as a lot of other people, partially because, like, it's funny because people listen to these things because they find it entertaining or interesting, and to me it's like listening to work, right?
Makes sense.
Same thing. Like I watched Making of a Murder just because I got tired of people asking me about Making of a Murder, but it literally was like work to me. And super frustrating watching some of the things that happened, although I guess that was for everybody. And so, yeah, I believe it was, and I think it was actually Jerry Grant who ended up testifying, basically showing the errors. And I know Jerry pretty well. Jerry's excellent. super smart guy, very, very intelligent, and he's a great witness, frankly. That's somebody I'd be very happy with having on my team.
Yeah, I didn't follow the case as much, but I just somehow it clicked in my head that this was something very similar, that his location was pinned and they finally went into looking at the cell phone towers. So something very similar. But I think like in that comparison, just a little off topic, if you're in New York City and it's a 1 mile radius and you can be anywhere around, but if you are in a secluded location, if it's a 1 mile radius, I think that would be of more weight than compared to being in a crowded place where you can.
Right. So to give an example, the other thing with New York City is that there are thousands of towers, right?
Yes,
and
correct.
they cover, right? And the whole point, the reason why, companies set up these towers, and this is kind of where it gets interesting, because they don't keep these records for the purposes of tracking people for law enforcement, right? They keep these records for billing, right? And it's so they're accurate enough to the purpose of them billing, right? It's really what their goal is, right? And so if you hit a sector of a tower and maybe you hit this other sector, they don't really care. Like that doesn't really affect their billing purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like we've had, for example, we had a case not too long ago where a client was charged with a shooting, and he had an alibi, which was that he was in Staten Island. The shooting was in the Bronx, and we had his phone records, among other things, showing that he basically the time that he was receiving a call, that it would have been impossible for him to have made it to the Bronx to have committed this shooting, right? Mm. Now it would be, I've never seen an example, and I can't imagine an example where you're hitting a tower in Staten Island and
so far away.
Right, and you're in the Bronx. It's just not really possible, especially considering all the towers you'd have to blow by in the meantime, right? And again, your phone's connecting to the strongest signal, which again is generally the tower you're closest to, barring some differences. But and so that helped clear him. His case was dismissed, and it was an ID case, right? It was the wrong ID. They ID'd the wrong guy, which happens way more frequently than anybody wants to really admit.
True.
But now we're able to use the technology to show that, right? And of course it works the other way too. They're also able to use the technology to try to put you somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. You said, I was hanging out with my cousins in Virginia, and your phone was pinging in the Bronx, and right near where the crime scene is. It's probably not good for you, right? But then you even run into, because we see this with prosecutors all the time, where they're like, well, he hits tower near the crime scene around the same time. Like, yeah, but he also lives a block away. Like that means nothing, right? Like just putting the phone near the crime scene doesn't mean much, right? Yeah. Like he's like, yeah, a stabbing happened in our client's neighborhood, and so surprise, he was home. Right?
Yeah, at least
makes sense.
Yeah. Your resume or CV was very impressive, and just a little bit questions on that. So you have centered a lot and have a lot of expertise on a wide range of factors such as AI, metadata, and abuse related to cybercrime, cyber usage. Would you mind telling us as to one of the most underrated thing of digital forensics, and give us a little bit idea as to how all those factors play a role?
Sure. So, I think there, one of the misunderstandings I think people have is that this is all very simple, press a button and it does everything for you, and that's just not true. And I think part of that is that people don't realize just how complicated all these devices are, and the other part of it is that it's changing constantly, right? That every time you get an update to iOS or Android, our work just changed, right? And we have to learn that. Not to mention that, okay, so we know how WhatsApp works, we know iMessage, right? you know, there's 100 different messaging apps that go on the iTunes and you know, Google Play Store every day, right? All the time. And
Right.
people install these different things and use them differently. And so, you know, be able to work through that is complicated, but it's very rewarding. You know, and I'm lucky that I get to work, you know, if analysts, in-house analysts who are much more qualified to do that work than I am, you know, frankly. And they do amazing work. I do remember, like, for, you know, there's a lot of different cases, but to give an example, we had a case where our client was alleged to have been stealing from his job, and he got fired as a result, and he got charged with grand larceny. And our client's version of the events was that my boss, my direct boss, told me to take out this money, and I gave it to him as he requested. And I have the text messages. The problem is that the text messages are on this device that's broken. And we literally we bought another, it was missing too many pieces. It was, you know, the screen was cracked and like couldn't turn on. And so we actually bought another device, the exact same model, swapped out as much of the parts as we could without losing any of the what it was saved. We're able to turn it on and extract data from it, and we were able to pull text messages. We were able to pull these text messages proving what our client had said, right? And as a result, the case was dismissed. But so we had these text messages from, and you know, to further prove it, we ordered call detail records from the phone companies to show, one, that phone number definitely was associated with his boss, and two, that these messages had actually occurred and they weren't being spoofed or anything like that. But that was, yeah, it was really rewarding. And the guy came with a phone in pieces, saying that the evidence that was going to clear him needed, you know, we needed to get it off there, and we were able to, you know, and
Right.
he had, you know, guy could have, I don't think he would have gone to prison, but if he had been convicted, I would think at least probation.
Right. And it puts a negative connotation on your name too at the end.
Oh yeah.
Get hired,
Absolutely.
so many repercussions you have to face because of things like this. So
I mean, criminal records really, I mean, they can hurt people in so many ways: job opportunities, public,
renting,
yeah, just anything you could think of. Yeah.
I know for a fact that the people who rent out their houses, they don't, if they do a background check and if you have a criminal record, they don't even like think about looking at your application. So like
Yep.
living is difficult. So
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
I might. So that's amazing. So with the increasing privacy that now as everybody wants, because everyone is getting aware that, oh my God, too much information is now going out where we don't want it to. Are you guys facing challenges with those restrictions in place?
Yes and no. So some of those restrictions are not that difficult for us because we're getting consent of our clients, or their friends, family, witnesses, whoever it may be. But it has caused some problems because almost all those privacy rules and laws and guidelines have these gaping exceptions for law enforcement, right? And so something that, you know, so for example, there's a law called the Stored Communications Act. It's a federal law that was passed in 1986. So imagine now trying to apply a law from 1986 to modern life when nobody knew it. You know, there was like what 0.01% of people knew what a cell phone even existed. There was, you know, definitely wasn't 5G, and you know, and all these other, you know, social media didn't exist. The World Wide Web didn't exist. A very basic form of the internet existed, you know, like BBS boards maybe, right? And so the law never contemplated all these things, but it has this big exception. It basically prevents people from being able to access to be able to get data from like servers, right? So like social media content, things like that, right? But it has this gaping exception for law enforcement, you know, with being able to get warrants, which, okay, like I get that, but at the same time, like if I need to get something to help my client, I get barred, right? Because I'm not law enforcement, which also means I can't get a warrant, right? And, you know, there's a lot, we've been pushing back on laws like that with mixed success so far, you know, because it's frankly is preventing us from properly representing our clients. And if it was really about privacy, right? If that was really the issue, then you wouldn't make it so easy for police.
Right.
Right.
And the big tech companies bend over backwards to help them, right? And there's this idea that that they're really going to fight for you. No, they won't. Facebook literally has a separate portal that allows law enforcement literally just to upload the search warrant, and it goes directly to them, right? And they're not the only ones, right? Now, if I want to serve something on Facebook, like a subpoena, right, or any of the meta companies, I have to go through a whole long process and haven't served on them personally out in San Mateo County, California, right? And it's a long process, which I won't bore you with. But police just from their computers upload a copy, right? And it's easy.
But why do defense always has to take such difficult route to do the same thing? It is like
That's a good question. Ask our elected officials.
it is philosophical. It's not kind of digital, but it's like
because the reality is our elected officials don't gain any benefit from helping the defense, right? But they all love to be tough on crime and help law enforcement. Nobody wants to have to go deny law enforcement's ability to get something, right? But at the same time, they're more than happy to screw us. And the courts a lot of times work the same way. I mean, that's oftentimes it's our best bet, but even then it usually doesn't until we get up to higher courts. The trial level judges, say the majority of them are just looking for ways to deny us things, right? Or to help law enforcement, help prosecutors, right? Because they know that there's rarely ever a punishment for a judge who's too harsh, right? Or denies the defense. Whereas if they're too lenient, they end up on the front page of the New York Post, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they release somebody from jail who then commits another crime, you see that judge's face and name everywhere. If somebody dies at Rikers Island who turned out should have never been there, right? And like maybe, nobody should be there.
Which has happened.
It's a fucking hellhole. Sorry.
We know.
It's a terrible place, but even if you assume that somebody deserves to be there, there's people who die there who were innocent, who didn't do anything. And you never know those judges' names. You never see their face.
Right.
And so they know that if they rule against us and lean towards the prosecution, there's probably rarely ever going to be any political consequence, right? Or public consequence. But the other way, if they help us, there's always that risk.
But isn't the most basic thing is the person who is going through, like, who is kind of the suspect is innocent until proven guilty. So both sides should be given equal amount of support, because
I agree with you.
That yet, right? It's like bias before even.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, and that, it goes beyond just what we're talking about now.
Right.
I mean, we could talk about just how much money is given to prosecution offices and police departments, and how almost every public defender office in the country is underfunded. Some of them to an extent that it's unbelievable that it's allowed to ever happen, right? Like we're underfunded in New York City, but I've seen some parts in the country where it's unbelievable just how bad it is. And when I see that, it gives me a little bit of perspective, just how lucky, we are. I mean, my unit exists at all, right? That's, there's places struggling just to have enough attorneys not to have 200 plus cases at a time, but their counterparts are being very well funded, right? So it goes beyond just the context of
the scope of this podcast, but
definitely
there has to be another episode just for this. I'll let Julian ask questions, otherwise I'll keep on this diatribe.
Earlier you talked about, I guess Nidhi asked you a question about AI and stuff. I just wanted to know, does that really not really, but how much does it affect your job? Like, because I know we have people talk about things like ChatGPT and all these things. So how does AI really affect the digital forensics investigation and reconstruction and data in general?
Sure. So it does a lot, right? It becoming more and more prominent too.
Right.
So for example, um, I talked about facial recognition in terms of surveillance earlier, but even face recognition in terms of going through data, right? And so say I have 10,000 pictures on a phone and I'm really just looking for pictures of this individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of programs now who then be able to go through those pictures really quickly and pull out the ones that have that picture of that person, at least what they believe to be, right? And of course, none of these things are perfect. We also see it being used in terms of images, trying to identify drugs and weapons, right? Guns in particular, right? And also combing through, basically combing through a large amount of data, which there's a crossover between, digital forensics in this regard and what we call e-discovery, right? Electronic discovery, and being able to find things that are duplicates or to make assumptions based upon the data that the program is reading, or even being able to parse out the data, right? So like a very common thing that happens is when you do, say, an extraction on a phone, when you put it into the software, it automatically starts categorizing the data, right? It'll say, okay,
Right.
this is from WhatsApp, this is from iMessage, this is photos, these are contacts, right? And it can't do it for everything, and there's definitely unparsed data that sometimes you have to go through, but it is learning how to do that, right? And it gets better all the time, and things change, and it picks up on it and gets better, right? And then it can make assumptions based on that. Not always perfect or correct, but it does. And you also start seeing, if you take large enough data and from enough sources, you could start, cross-referencing it to figure out, let's say, who are friends, right? Who are close friends and who are family members. Another popular one is essentially who's the supplier, who's the higher up on the chain, right? Because if you see like two people who, let's say, are already convicted of drug sales, right? Large drug transportation, and they all talk to one guy, right? They never talk to each other, and then all the people that talk to them, who are lower level people who are being arrested, right? Never talk to that higher guy. You've probably figured out somebody who's higher up on the food chain, right? And you can start doing that by figuring out all the communications and how frequently and at what times of day and night, and all this starts to play into this, right? And again, it's not always perfect. It may just be that those two guys are friends with him, and he, and the other people who just have no idea who that guy is. Like they just, maybe they went to school with him, whatever, right? But these are things you start seeing being used for that purpose. Yeah.
That's a pretty big jump to make, I guess. Are you I guess, are we letting AI make that jump, or is it more of like you let AI collect the data and then you sift through maybe the data? Like in that case with the hierarchy, would you just let the AI make that assumption, or is that something it makes the assumption and then you go through it to see the validity of it?
I think that depends on who you're asking. For me, I don't think assumptions like that should be trusted to AI. I don't think assumptions should
agree.
occur, but particularly don't think it should be trusted to AI. But this trips more into the electronic surveillance aspect of it. Police are using predictive policing algorithms, right? And they do rely on it, right? And what a surprise that the people who are being harassed by them and are being found to be higher risk levels or possibly more dangerous don't look like me, right? Right. And right. It's like, if you're going to feed years of racist data into the system to train it, it's going to give you racist results, right? It doesn't change anything.
Wow.
But then, also going back to this, again, another thing in my unit, right, part of our job is to also challenge some of that, right? One, to challenge its use in general, right? It's, how it's being used and if it's being used correctly, and then the assumptions being made, right? And so if if you were even going to use something like that, where it's deciding, like, figure out like the hierarchy or whatever of a drug network, right? At best, it should give you maybe more reason to look into it deeper, right? So this person maybe who wasn't on your radar, maybe now you want to figure out who he is, right? But to make moves off it, like arrests or, going to the person's home, or even trying to get a search warrant socially based, almost entirely based on that, is ridiculous. But these things are happening. We see people, we've already seen multiple cases, and those are just the public ones. There's definitely private ones that are that people just don't want their names out there. People being falsely arrested based on facial recognition, right? And it's literally just the algorithm saying that I think these people are similar enough.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's very interesting, because that brings me to my next question. So I just know about DNA, but if you're presenting something or new technology in DNA, that has to be backed up by validation studies, and that's why a lot of research goes into it.
Yeah.
How relevant is it in the field of digital forensics? Like, how do you present data? Like, does it has to be backed up by studies with so much expansion in the field as it is, like, happening every second? How does it work?
There are definitely tests of software. It's a little hard. It's a little hard for a couple of reasons. One of them is that there are so many factors. It becomes really difficult to test for them all at any given point, right? Think of a software that you use just in your regular life, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, we found this bug that's been here for 10 years, and all of a sudden somebody just did the right steps that triggered it, right? But we didn't know about it, right? And we're just talking about massive companies, Microsoft, Google, right? And so it's hard to set up a proper test to deal with all those possibilities, right? Whereas something, let's say, like, not the DNA is easy by any means, but for the most part, DNA, the structure is known, how it works is known, right? It's becoming more complicated with touch DNA and transference and mixtures, right? But the science is at the base level is known, right? Digital forensics, there's definitely some base level knowledge things, but every time a company changes something or invents something new or does it in a different way, it completely can change everything. I will say that one of the good things is that you can repeat the test, right, and get the same results with the same software. What's interesting though is that you could have two different softwares, right, get different results, and neither one of them necessarily be wrong, right? And so that's where it becomes a little complicated, because one may have been able to pull data off a device that another wasn't able to, but what the other one did pull off the device is all accurately there. It just maybe wasn't able to get something else, right? And so we do see that. And there are, NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, recently put out two reports last year, and actually I pulled them up so I make sure I get their names right. So it's Digital Investigation Techniques, and NIST Scientific Foundation Review, and that was from November 2022, I believe it's November. And then there was also the results from a black box study for digital forensic examiners, which I believe came out in February 2022. And kind of the interesting thing is that NIST basically says, one, for the black box study, they found some interesting results, and they said that sample size was too small for them to make like final conclusions, but that it definitely needed to be investigated more. Although one of the things they said is, actually, I'll see if I could read the one of the takeaways. Quality control techniques and attributes normally associated with improved performance did not seem to make a difference in this study. The only attribute that correlated with improved score performance was the completion of a certification program, right? And so basically both these reports, almost seemingly begrudgingly, say digital forensics can't be measured in the way that traditional forensics is measured. And basically we need to study it more to figure out what to do about that. but that it just doesn't fit right in that way. You know, and it's and I get that, right? It's you know, a lot of the things that are often problematic in standard forensics don't come up as much in digital forensics, and then the issues that come up for us don't come up in traditional forensics, right?
Right.
And you know, so I think it's difficult. We do run into this other problem, which is even for the things that, you know, for example, the stuff I was describing and saying how I wouldn't trust, right? Our courts have really dropped the ball, and they've let people just claim things are what they are, right? And when defense attorneys ask for what we call, let's say, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, a Fry test or a Daubert test, right? You know, to challenge the scientific validity of this evidence, right? And or its acceptance in the community, depending on the standard. And the courts have just so often just deny it, deny the ability to do that, or they hold it and it's almost like a farce, so to speak. Like, and the deference that is given to this is a problem, right? And this I think is a problem across forensics, different forensic practices, is that a lot of times the people who are testifying as experts in these things have a vested financial interest in it, right? So when you use like the mixture software stuff, right, and you want to challenge the decisions that software is making, well, okay, well, you have one company who's a company that was used, and they're going to explain why it's a trade secret and they can't give you access to that, to the source code or the training data, and two, why theirs works perfectly. And then you have the other company who will say, well, I got a different result. I also won't let you look at my source code or training data, but mine works better than theirs, and this is why I'm right. And it's like, okay, well, how can I trust either of you? You both have this extreme financial interest in it, and you won't let any true third-party independent testing, right? You know, and any version of that, you put people under non-disclosure agreements that are unbelievably restrictive.
Right. That's tough.
What's that?
That's tough.
Yeah. And you know, we see that, right? And we also see this problem too, which is, you know, forensic practices that get built up that were never truly scientifically valid to begin with, but now trying to take them out, you know, is based on, well, we've been doing this for, like, you know, we'll talk about bite mark, you know, and hair analysis, right? And that flew for decades, right? You know, and you know, PCAST report kind of helped with that, but it still flies in some parts of the country. Even with fingerprints, right? We talked about, you know, how accurate that was, and then, you know, we had an American who had never left the U.S. get arrested for a bombing in Madrid, and right, and it wasn't him, right? We found out later that, you know, that the fingerprints, the Spanish authorities said, well, the fingerprints actually matched to somebody we had already on our own terrorist watch list, right? But how could you have such a difference in results, right? And we now see, you know, the feds, at least the FBI in particular, kind of backing off how decisive they are when they say something's a match or the probability of it, right?
Right.
But the problem is that our courts aren't set up. They're not academic scientific challenges, right? That's not how they're designed. And even though the languages that you speak in court is different from the languages you speak in your paper, right? And sometimes those things don't mash up well.
Right.
That's
very
a
true.
very interesting point, actually. I always wondered. So it's so difficult as a defense attorney or prosecution to explain evidence in court. Like likelihood ratio is one of the things that I've always been stuck with. I don't know how people get it and how people explain it, like the experts. Yeah. What are some of the challenges when it comes to explaining digital forensics to the jury when it would be a wide range of age population in front of you guys? Like, some understands AI and like everything that's going on, but then the other spectrum who gets nothing about it. So what's the sweet?
No, it's a real problem, and people hear computers and science, and they're like, oh, it must be true, right? And they're so smart, and it works so well, and so prosecutors often complain. I'm sure you've all heard this, the CSI effect, right? Juries expect us to be able to pull anything from anywhere and get exact results, and there's definitely some truth in that complaint. But the other side of that is that when you present them with anything, right, they just almost take it as truth because they're like, oh, well, this is done with some really expensive software, right? And trying to then challenge that basically shifts the burden to the defense, which is not how our system's supposed to work. And I'll give like an example. We had a case where the prosecution said that they had found a picture of a picture on our client's phone of the gun that was used in a homicide, right? Pretty bad, right? That sounds terrible. And they had their analyst get up there, and he didn't lie, but he was very careful in what he said about this picture and when it was created. And thankfully we had prepped our attorney in the case to cross him correctly. And the reality was, it wasn't a full picture. It was a thumbnail, right? It was a thumbnail of a picture, and it was not possible, based upon the data on the phone, to distinguish where to figure out where that the original picture had come from, right? That whether it had been taken on his phone, had been downloaded from the internet, had been sent from someone else. Besides the fact that you also couldn't tell whether or not it's the same model gun, or if it's the gun, right?
Right.
Because two guns the same model are going to look very similar for the most part, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their analyst conceded it once he was confronted with it. But had he not been confronted, he would have left the jury with this impression. Oh, and the date was really important too, right? And he said, oh, it was created at this date and time, which would have been consistent with their theory of the events. But he had he had to concede that yes, they didn't know if it was actually taken on this phone, or where it came from, or how it was received. It was no longer on the phone; it was a thumbnail, right? And that had been generated, and that the dates that he was giving were not reliable for that purpose, because thumbnail dates, creation dates, don't necessarily correspond with the creation of the photo itself, both how when it gets actually on the phone and or when it was taken, right? And he conceded all this. But had we not had somebody prepared to cross him on that, the jury would have been left this impression that there was a picture of the murder weapon on our client's phone, and he took the picture, right? Which was their intent, to give that impression, right? But
true,
it was very difficult for talking about these things to get the jury to understand what the thumbnail creation dates and things like that, and it was very difficult to get them to understand that.
That makes sense.
I'll let Julian ask before I say.
So you see that you've testified in court about the Post Act. Could you explain what that is and how it relates to digital forensics?
Sure. So it wasn't in court; it was in city council hearings.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no. So the Post Act stands for Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology, and it comes from. It's a version of this model bill the ACLU put out called CCOPS, which, of course, now I'm forgetting exactly what that stands for, but it's a transparency bill essentially. Some other jurisdictions, their models are much stronger, allowing for actual ability to prevent police from. So essentially, this is oversight of police using surveillance technology, right? And other jurisdictions outside New York City who have passed a version of this are actually a lot stronger than New York's. And so we're not exactly satisfied with New York's, right? It just really requires transparency about the surveillance technology that the NYPD is using. And it requires essentially them to publish impact and use policies for each type of surveillance that they're using. And also when acquiring new technology, to give the public a 45-day to publish it 90 days before the use of it, give the public 45 days to comment on the impact and use policy, and to try to change it if necessary. The other jurisdictions have versions which actually allow some sort of control about it being used at all, right? Which is definitely the better version. There's a lot of pushback on it, but I think most of the pushback is not wrong in terms that it's not strong enough, and transparency alone is not really the goal. And I agree with that. But because of the laws in the city of New York, in New York, actually prevent our city from passing a stronger version. Literally legally, they couldn't pass a stronger version. It was always meant to be a step, right? A step into further into the fight against a lot of these technologies being used. Things like facial recognition, right? Automated license plate readers, right? Things like that. And so I didn't support it, and my organization didn't support it with the idea that this was, once we passed, that was it. It was always supposed to be a step in a much larger fight, and I still believe that. But one of the benefits that it's had from the public defender's perspective is that now we have a better understanding of what the NYPD actually has and how it's being used, not perfectly, but better. And that allows us to fight it better in our individual cases for our individual clients, right? So, yep.
Okay, cool. Interesting.
I see that we're almost at 7, so just 2 more questions.
Sure.
First one is, you are an attorney. What was the motivation to get into digital forensics? So are you trained? Did you take classes that prompted you in that direction, or like how does one transition?
Sure. So ever since I was a little kid, I was very interested in technology, particularly in trying to poke holes in it. I very much so was trying to figure out how to break things and then rebuild them. Much sometimes to my parents' annoyance, having to reinstall operating systems and things like that. But I didn't imagine, when I became a lawyer and doing criminal defense, that there would really be a lot of intersection there. And about 2 years after I started at Legal Aid, they created this digital forensics unit, along with our DNA unit. It got created at about the same time. But at that point, there was only 4 analysts in the unit and no attorneys. And it took me, it took a little while, but I realized that they were being underutilized because they were basically talking different languages. So the attorneys didn't understand what the analysts were saying. The analysts didn't necessarily understand what the attorneys were saying. And so I understood enough of the technology just from my own personal interests and in privacy and technology in general, and also seeing in my cases. I was always very anti-surveillance. And so on top of my regular caseload, I volunteered essentially to be the interpreter, right, between these 2 different groups. And it went very well. And so I convinced Legal Aid to create a permanent position. And then after that point, it's now grown quite a bit. And it's coming out more and more in our cases. And so that's really what happened. And since that point now, I have done some more formal training and stuff like that. But it really just was kind of a personal passion interest of mine in tech and computers and hacking. I always liked hacking stuff. I mean, I think one of the things I always think is funny, because so many digital forensic people would be so upset to hear me say this, but it's true. A large part of digital forensics is just hacking, right? Like when we're trying to get around a passcode onto a device, you are literally hacking the device, right? When you're trying to get data from somewhere where like Apple or Google is trying to prevent you from doing it, or Samsung or whoever, right? You are literally hacking it. You were trying to find a flaw in it that allows you to exploit, right? And so it fit with me perfectly.
I'm glad you found that passion. Like the balance of it and like helping the society in so many ways, which is amazing.
Thank you.
So the one follow-up question after that is this: if there's someone like you out there who probably listens to this podcast, what kind of resources would you recommend for someone coming in the field?
Sure. So I mean, I'll give a shout out to ourselves first. One, people should always feel free to reach out to me. I try to, I may not be able to respond right away, but I do try to respond to everybody and try to help as much as I can. We also have a newsletter, a monthly newsletter called Decrypting a Defense. It's on Substack, so it's digitalforensicslas.substack.com. And so I think that's helpful. Trying to think. The scientific working group on digital evidence is very useful. If you're able to attend conferences, Techno Security and Digital Forensics Conference, which there's a couple around the country every year. Some other resources, SANS. SANS has some very expensive courses, but they also have a lot of free tools that you could learn how to mess around with and learn for yourself, because a lot of digital forensic tools are not free and are actually very expensive. So but learning on the free tools will give you a really good basis of that. Trying to think some other resources. There's a blog called The Binary Hick, which is a digital forensic practitioner. It's really helpful. Alchemsoft's blog is very helpful. And there's a blog that kind of rounds up weekly all the changes in digital forensics software and things like that, called This Week in 4, the number 4, and the letter N 6, 4 and 6 forensic. Clever. And so, yeah, I would say start with some of those. There's a lot of stuff out there, but hopefully that'll kind of start leading you in the right direction.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Very valuable. We'll add all this in our show notes so people will get an idea as to where to look for. And we'll also put in your email. And of course, it's totally up to you whenever you get the time to respond if someone emails you.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I feel bad sometimes I don't get back to people as quickly as I want, but individual, our clients always take priority.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Right.
Without saying, but we really appreciate the time that you devoted.
Definitely.
It was very informative, and sorry for the different diatribes that we usually go to, but it was.
I definitely went off on tangents, so I apologize as well.
It was a lot of fun learning about digital forensics. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and feel free to reach out.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll share the episode once it's all edited and ready to go. And feel free to send it to whoever you wish to and spread the news.
I will do that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks again, man.
No problem. Talk to you later.
Bye.